Little.
Back
Hello,
at
everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Aaron and Sean here, coming back with another live stream. Thank you guys for joining. We do live streams every Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So make sure to like, subscribe if you're on YouTube, Rumble, or Twitter. Follow us. Trying to keep you guys up to date every single day on Bitcoin and strategy and MetaPlanet and these Bitcoin treasuries and everything BTC. So we appreciate every single one of you guys for coming in and watching. In today's live stream, we're going to get into some updates regarding MicroStrategy or Strategy that has had their earnings call. So we'll be discussing some of that. We'll also be discussing some updates from other public treasury companies and public companies buying BTC. We got a pretty big player announcing that they're going to continue to buy Bitcoin every quarter. We'll be talking about that and the impacts of that going forward. And also, everything that we talk about in today's video or in any of our videos is not financial advice, just our opinion. It's just what we see in the market. We've been investing in Bitcoin and crypto since around 2016, and we've been making these videos on YouTube since 2021. So just giving our opinion on the current state of the market. So like and subscribe if you are new. And we normally start off with the charts, and Sean's going to go ahead and look at some of that. So let's go ahead and get into some of the charts here.
Okay. As always, guys, make sure you smash the like, repost, retweet, share this with any family or friends. We appreciate all you guys' support. But getting straight into it, let's take a look at the Bitcoin price. So we did have a pullback today. We had a pullback going down to 115.7K at the current time of this recording. And if you guys follow the channel and pay attention to the videos, we told you that we've been sort of trading in this range from 117 to roughly 119, and we haven't had any decisive closes below or above the channel. Once we had a close above the channel, we came right back into it, and you've seen this now twice. Could this be that we love to see you smile McDonald's pattern? And could we be coming down for a back test? Is the bull market over with? So to answer your quick question, no, bull market's not over with yet, guys. At least that is our take on the current status. But we did fall down out of this channel. This is something that we've been talking about and something that we've been anticipating. If you've been watching any previous videos, where is the levels to pay attention to? Well, firstly, let's wait until the traditional markets open back up tomorrow, because as you've seen, we had a fake out here and we came back into the channel, fake out here, came back into the channel, a brief fake out here, came back in. Now this could be a fake out to the downside. Let's see what we do tomorrow. Could we come back into this channel and be trading right back between the 117 and 119 range? Mind you, we've been trading in this channel since July 11th. So going on over 2 weeks now, about 2.5 weeks, if my math is right. Now, if we do see a continuation to the downside, where could we go? Zooming out, you see that there is a lot of previous resistance around this orange dotted line, which sits around the 109.8K. So just a few $100 between friends is 110,000. And we hit this once, twice, 3 times, and then the 4th time we blasted through. So this could just be, a bump and run back test, something like this. If we do get a continuation, let's wait to see what the markets give us tomorrow. So that's Bitcoin. Looking at the Bitcoin dominance, because this is what, a lot of people are caring about. And, Bitcoin dominance is indicative of when that alt season that a lot of retail investors are waiting for, and we will see what happens. So look at this on the 3-day. We did get this extremely bearish golfing candle here. We fell down to the bottom range of this support, and if we zoom, let me get my cursor so I can move this appropriately and make this bigger. And if we zoom out here, we see that we've just been trading, putting higher highs, higher lows, higher highs. So we need to, right now, as we're holding right above this support level, will we fall through, and will that alt season happen? That is still to be determined. We've looked at this on the 3-day, but also looking at on the weekly. This is potentially just looking like a bullish continuation. As you see, the 20 has crossed over both the 50 and 200 moving averages. All moving averages are pointing to the upside. This could just be a cool off or reset. Looking at some indicators, if we go back down to the lower time frame, let's go back down to the 3-day. It seems like the 3-day potentially could have had a full reset. It's hard to tell right now. Can't really tell with this current setup. But right now we are trading below and oversold positions on the daily at around 61.74%. And we haven't had any type of divergence as of now. So we'll see. We see this green line, which is the 20 crossing over the blue and red line. We'll see what happens when will we get back above this, or will we get knocked down and fall out of this channel? So that's what we see with the Bitcoin dominance. Is there anything that you wanted to speak on that, Aaron, before we go to strategy?
Yeah, just from I guess from a perspective of what's going on in the economy, I believe that we're not going to see Bitcoin dominance go much lower until we see rate cuts from the Federal Reserve. That's something that I've continuously said on our channel. So, and we're not, and Federal Reserve came out earlier this week and they said they're not going to be lowering interest rates, probably not till the end of the year, potentially next year. Obviously, the CPI data could change that, but I think until we see either quantitative easing or interest rates gets lowered, then we'll see Bitcoin dominance fall. But I think I think this support level is a good level to look at right now for it to go higher.
Yeah. So, I mean, alt season might not be here. We've seen a couple tokens pop, like a little bit of euphoria when it came to retail. We've seen the Google trends as far as altcoins return. But right now, looking at this chart, this area is no different than where we were at way back when people were calling for an alt season here. And this one, Bitcoin was at 55%, and then it rallied up to 65, ultimately 66%, another 11% move. So, if we see that again, that'll take Bitcoin up to 72 to 73% range. So is that a real possibility if we look to the right of the charts? It could be. It could be, sometime by the end of the year or even before then. We are oversold on the daily, on the RSI once again. We're seeing the stochastic in overbought territory there. So that's just something to pay attention to as time progresses. In strategy, let's pivot to, the biggest news of the day. They had their earnings call today. And let's just look at the price action on the charts. And forgive us because we, use this same chart and we track, this in our weekly videos. So that's where all these lines and such are on here. So I'll try to clean it up just for this video's sake. But, we showed you that this is a macro bull flag pattern that we came out, and there's micro bull flags we're seeing in here. But we're just continuing to put in, just breaking structure, breaking downwards resistance, and currently higher highs and higher lows. The level to pay attention to if we do get a further pullback to the downside is the 360 range. There's no guarantee that we will see that. And there might be a gap up here that might not have fully got filled around 440. There's a lot of bullishness, a lot of bullish news that has happened. We showed the technical target, so we're not going to get too far into that and get straight into the news. Aaron, I don't know if you wanted to take over and talk about the first aspect of what's going on in the Saylor and strategy team.
Yeah, sure. I'll share my screen just to give a visual here of what the EPS came out to be. The expected numbers from the analysts on Wall Street, they were thinking negative earnings per share, and the numbers actually came out as 32.60. They beat expectations by 46,000%, which is pretty crazy. Revenue, they only beat by 2%. So majority of the profit came from the Bitcoin that they were holding. And the market really didn't care too much. In the after hours, after the market was closed, strategy has traded down since the close. So I don't think the market really cares about these numbers. I think that that was already priced in, even though the analysts didn't really understand. Obviously, you can see there was a huge the expectation there was missed greatly. But I do think that there is some type of mispricing for strategy still, that the traditional markets aren't understanding what they're doing, how they're creating a new financial system, and how much Bitcoin they actually have and where Bitcoin's going. Strategy at a 1.5 MNAV to me is just severely underpriced. So the market didn't really care about the EPS number though. So we'll see what happens going forward, but it's interesting to see the market really didn't care too much about that.
Yeah, let's take a look at this tab here. So this is basically to reiterate some of the figures. They post a Q2 earning, basically of 14 billion, operation income, 10 billion net income. Yes, 100%. It was an awesome earnings call. 32.6 EPS. Earnings guidance, 34 billion, 24 billion net income, $80 EPS, 80% Bitcoin yield, $20 billion in Bitcoin dollar gain. So, breaking all this down in lamest terms, they had $14 billion of operating income. And this is, basically how much the company made from its core business before any interest or taxes. And then you got the 10 billion income, which is after all expenses and taxes, basically the final profit, and the $32.6 earnings per share. So the way to think about this is if you earned one share, the company earned about almost $33 for that given share in Q2. So looking at the overall 2025 yearly end-to-end forecasts on what's going on, they've had over $30 billion of operating income for the entire year, with of that 24 billion net income to be expected. And they expect to earn $80 per share this year. So, this is just in layman's terms, like Strategy's making huge profits from this Bitcoin treasury strategy. It's got well over what's the number now? 620,000 plus Bitcoin.
Let's see.
Yeah,
628,000 now.
628,000. And they expect to make a lot more money from this Bitcoin. And from an investment stance, these numbers is an extremely strong signal of growth and earnings potential looking into the future. So, if you guys aren't accountable with 2% funding company, appreciate you joining, Jacob. But yeah, so if you guys aren't paying attention to these figures, you're sort of sleeping under a rock. I think Saylor had mentioned that they're having their iPhone moment in this earnings call, and if you want to pivot to that next topic, we can talk about that in a little bit more detail. I think it was in reference to Stretch, if I'm not mistaken.
Sorry, what was that? Talk about the ATM?
No, it was the Saylor had mentioned on the earnings call that he had they're having their iPhone moment. I didn't know if you had that slide pulled up, but if not, I can grab it.
No, I don't have iPhone.
Worries, but let's see here. It's not really anything to show, but basically stretches their iPhone moment, to give or take. And did you have the slide pulled up with the amounts?
The $4.2 billion ATM? I don't have a slide for it.
Stretch.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we can talk about it. So is it 4.2 or 4.8?
4.2, I believe. Let me double check.
Okay. Well, basically, with this new earnings preferred stretch that rolled out, they have 4.2 or 4.8. Don't have the slide pulled up right now, but the thought on this is that because of this, they're able to now buy more Bitcoin, this huge tranche they just bought, with just more without diluting the common A shareholders. Did you have any thoughts on that, Aaron, that you want to weigh in on?
For the STRC ATM, yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see. They had a massive $2.6 billion IPO, and it's going to be interesting to see what the volumes look like over the next couple of weeks. It's really new, so the volumes probably aren't going to be too crazy, but over the next couple of years, we'll definitely see it pick up. And what's really interesting is if we get to that point in time where the Federal Reserve actually comes in and starts cutting interest rates down, and we go from, I think we're around 4 or 5% right now, back down to 2, potentially down to 0 again. And if you think about like AI and inflation and all the things, you think inflation's coming down, and you think that they will eventually return to 0% interest rates. So the money that you get in a high yield savings account is going to be closer to 0 to 2%, and then you have STRC over here at 9%. And it's been around for a couple of years. I think that's when you really start to see massive flows come into STRC, and he's going to use all that volume coming in, hit that ATM. And I think overall it's going to be a lot bigger than the $4.2 billion that they're projecting right now. I think that's very early. I mean, I think that's very, the $4.2 billion is very, I think they'll get through that. Maybe, I don't know how long it's going to take, but that will be very slow as they get through that, as the volumes slowly come in. But eventually, when interest rates go down a couple years out, the product has built confidence. People can get an easy 9% APY. I think that's when you're going to see STRC become the biggest product that they have, and really just hit that fixed income market, the high yield saving account market, and also just the trillions of dollars that are sitting in bank accounts right now. And those could flow into STRC, and they would use all that money that flows into STRC and buy Bitcoin. So I think that's what he meant maybe by the iPhone moment. So yeah, that's my thoughts there.
Oh, no worries. Let's just share this screen up because they also gave some equity guidance, which there's a lot of conversation about this on X or Twitter, about Saylor just sort of willy-nilly hitting the ATM whenever he pleases and just buying as much Bitcoin, diluting shareholders without any like real strategy. There was talks, a lot of comparison between Metaplanet versus strategy, and each one of them are great in their own respect in their given markets. Obviously, strategy has a 4 to 5 year head start as far as their Bitcoin acquisition strategy goes, and they're the first to get preferreds, which getting into that preferred market is really the end goal for a lot of these treasury companies. For those that don't understand that, it's not just about getting a treasury company and hiring some influencers to pump up the hype around it, which can cause short-term sentiment and spikes in the price, but there actually has to be a long-term strategy, and accessing that preferred market is definitely an important route to go. So Saylor obviously has the first-hand advantage in there. Saylor has publicly mentioned that Simon will beat him to the first being to offer it in the Japanese markets, but it'll be interesting to see what other offerings that strategy has and what other markets they start to target, if any. I think that might be, potentially in their short to midterm game plan. But the guidance was sort of some, I know a couple big X accounts was talking about this, not really having any structure on, the ATM, and the dilution doesn't even make sense to hold the stock. And, as far as like, call options go, like people were just, there was a lot of scrutiny around that, and Saylor, I think, cleared all that up. Well, I'm not gonna credit just Saylor and team. I think cleared that up with today's earnings call. with basically their equity guidance stating that they will not issue any more shares below 2.5x MNAV except to pay interest on the dividend. So that takes a lot less pressure on the common A for the common A shareholders. There won't be any equity dilution. They won't be ATM and it's a high hell. They have some type of benchmark that they're going to sort of set these guardrails in now. So that's definitely notable, and it gives an investor confidence when it comes to holding just the common A long term. So that's at below the 2.5 MNAV, and then if it's in between 2.5 and 4, you're looking at them being more opportunistic and strategic on how they issue those shares to acquire more Bitcoin. So they may take a playbook out of Metaplanet's playbook, and basically they tend to only do their strategy when the price is going up, so it's not as dilutive to shareholders, or the stock price sort of absorbs the sell pressure as there's extreme pent-up buy pressure. So they're going to be doing that strategy when they're in between that 2.5 and 4x MNAV. And then anything over 4, they're going to be actively issuing MSTR to acquire Bitcoin, probably whenever they want. So this, I think, gives a lot of confidence to investors as to what to expect moving forward. And I like it. I love the clarity. I love the transparency. And one thing that's most notable, like as far as the doors that I think that's one unique thing in this space is you have a lot of options to open up doors. And what that means is like, say if you work a corporate job at a Fortune 100, Fortune 500 company of your choice, it's not likely that you can just go walk up to the CEO of the company and knock on their door and just sit down and start to have a conversation. Those folks tend to have administrative staff that, for those walk-ups, that's not even allowed in most cases. So it's not really an open door policy. So, when, things are said, on these Twitter spaces and, different, outlets such as what we're doing right here, the executive staff, could be tuning into these live streams, and they're actually listening to what the market is saying and, some of the complaints. And that was one of the I guess over the past few months, there's a lot of scrutiny on, sort of how frequently, Saylor was hitting the ATM. And I think this gives that clarity, that investor confidence on what to expect as far as the overall operation of the Bitcoin treasury strategy. And I love it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on the clarity, because nobody really knew when they were and when they weren't going to hit the MSTR ATM. There was like a 3-month period where they didn't hit the ATM and the MNAV went nowhere, and people were kind of confused. They're like, why isn't the MNAV going up? But now they should, hopefully they keep their word on this, because Saylor has said in the past that if it gets below 2x, he's not going to hit it, but he didn't keep his word on that. So hopefully this is what they keep their word on, and they got to stick to this, just like some of the people in the comments were saying. So I agree with them as well.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. What's the next topic we're going to go to?
Just real quick on that. I think this is the first earnings call they've gave some type of structure surrounding the equity issuance guidance. Before, I think it may have been on some type of interview, he had mentioned about the ATM, and I think that's where that 2x MNAVs, I saying that they may or may not be hitting it, but there really wasn't over conclusive just guidance or buy-in from his executive staff on the guidelines and as far as when executing the strategy. So I think this time it's something to definitely pay attention to, based off of saying something and doing something else, but it's sort of been laid out here and it's very black and white. So don't just think that that's what it's going to be 100%. Things can always change depending on, the volatility of these markets. But I think they gave themselves a big enough nest egg to be able to stick to this. And once again, anything we mentioned here is not financial advice. So yeah, that's definitely exciting news. And I just was loving the earnings call as I was listening in. But what do you have next you want to talk about?
Let's see. We can look at the top 100 companies right now. Let me go ahead and share this here. The top 100 Bitcoin treasury companies. They are holding 920,000 Bitcoin now, so they almost have 1 million BTC. And you see all the green arrows on the screen here. This means all these companies that bought Bitcoin. I think this is probably in the past week. This image may be from Monday, so this is a week ago. So you have all these companies here, and we're having new companies get added to this almost every, well, not to this, but there's new companies coming into the top 100, new companies coming out buying Bitcoin. And they almost have 1 million. The top 100 only almost have 1 million. And most of these companies outside of the miners probably aren't going to be selling much or any of their Bitcoin unless, they go into some type of liquidation or they have to pay back their creditors. That's also a risk. But most of these guys have long-term visions when they're buying all this BTC. So you can kind of do the math on all this stuff. You see how much buy pressure is coming in, how much potential buy pressure we have coming over the next 6 to 12 months versus how much Bitcoin that's getting produced today. And the amount of Bitcoin that gets produced today, around 450, the corporations are buying more than the 450 a day just by how much they're buying alone. And then you also factor in that the Bitcoin ETFs, they're buying millions of dollars of Bitcoin every single day. So the price of Bitcoin has to go up unless the ETFs start to sell. But right now they're not doing that. So that's not financial advice. And we can definitely see the ETF sell off in the future, especially if you go into a bear market. But right now, a lot of companies are buying, and you can see it right here on this list. And there's some pretty big players looking to accumulate even more. Yeah.
So just I want to put this in perspective for people that aren't really ingesting this in the right way. There's a lot of excitement going around with a lot of Bitcoin treasury companies. Definitely do your due diligence on the team, what their strategy is, what their footprint is in the Bitcoin space. Are they true Bitcoiners? Or are they just trying to catch a wave to get their stock price to spike? There's a lot of different nuances and questions that you definitely have to go down certain rabbit holes before making your overall investment thesis on this. But when it comes to strategy and looking at the other Bitcoin companies, Bitcoin treasury companies, that is, the latest buy from Saylor was 21,000 and 21 Bitcoin. So, like the symbolism behind the number with a play on numbers there. But if you look at that, Saylor with one buy, purchased, just as much Bitcoin as the number 5th, like Riot Platforms has 19,000. So if Strategy didn't have any Bitcoin today and they made that purchase, they would be number 4 and bypass all these other companies that have been doing this for months or some for years. Just put that in perspective, like of how massive of a nest egg that Saylor has. These preferreds are very unique vehicles in order to generate more revenue for the underlying business and strategy as a whole. So don't be surprised if you see other companies rolling out to get these roll out some more preferreds, but it's not just going to happen overnight. We're seeing a lot of big buys, like initial start-offs, like we've seen 21 come out, and they've started with a surplus of over 30,000 Bitcoins. We're seeing Adam Beck come out with his company also buying 30,000 Bitcoin. So this from year over year, you had about 20 companies a year ago, and now you got over 200 companies doing this. And all of the huge capital and money on the sideline, really hasn't even showed up yet. We're still extremely early in this Bitcoin treasury play. And that's why these 200 companies, they understand that, that really, I think there's over 4,000, global companies that could, participate in this space. So what's that look like when that number goes to 2,000? Like, the pent up, demand for Bitcoin is going to be extremely astronomical. So just have a holistic understanding on, even though strategy has its MNAV, I think Aaron, you were mentioning this earlier to me, their MNAV is, at what 1.5, 1.8, something like that. Based off of that MNAV, what they're still able to do with the vehicles that they've now, rolled out to the market. So for whatever that's worth for your investment thesis.
Yeah. What else do we have to talk about? The ETFs, we can discuss them a little bit. The Bitcoin ETF. Let me switch to that screen. We can look at the ETF flows. So here's the ETF flows. You can see over the past 2 weeks, consistently we've had inflows for most days, but we had a couple of outflows these days. You can see right now, we're not fully in today with IBIT and FBTC is not in yet. I know FBTC is now in, but we haven't seen IBIT yet, and it's looking like we're having an outflow. And normally, when we see outflows in the ETF, it's surrounding some type of sell-off in the traditional markets or some type of scare in the traditional markets. So maybe with the Federal Reserve coming out saying we're going to be higher for longer. Jerome Powell wasn't very dovish in the last meeting. We haven't seen there hasn't been as much excitement in the market. Bitcoin's kind of stalled out a little bit, so maybe that's why the inflows are slowing down. But since we've seen these ETFs launch since last January, they have consistently accumulated Bitcoin, even though there are some months or weeks where there are outflows because of fear in the market. Like when Trump was talking about the tariffs, there was a lot of fear. The market sold off. The ETFs also sold off. But when the market got bullish again, they accumulated even more than they sold off. So over the long scale, they're continuously buying more Bitcoin.
Yeah, 100%. And let's just look at just this really quick. Should we look at this article, share this here, just to piggyback on the inflows. Bitcoin whales bought 1% of the overall circulating supply in the past 4 months. So understand what that means. That's 210,000 Bitcoins that's taken off and never going to be sold again in the market over the past 4 months. And remember that we're still extremely early on, and that everybody should at least try to get to have some type of stash. What you can get, whatever your personal goal is, 0.21 Bitcoins, half a Bitcoin, 1 Bitcoin, 2, 5, 10, 20, 100, whatever your goal is. Set that for you and your family, and just continue just to dollar cost average into a strong position, because this is going to be a Bitcoin arms race on a macro and global scale, over the next 5 to 10 years. And it's just starting now, and you're seeing how all these different footprints are being had over in Singapore, over in Japan, over in Europe, over in different areas of the world. And basically, this is the first time that we've seen something like this, like in human history, like that, different jurisdictions globally are sort of, realizing the power behind a given asset, and there's a limited supply of that asset. Now, it can't be, related to something like, if you want to relate Bitcoin to real estate, because that's, seems to be the narrative, with people that don't really understand Bitcoin. Should I buy Bitcoin? Should I buy real estate? When it comes to real estate, yeah, in a given, geographic location, pick your city of choice. There's X amount of homes, but in certain areas, they're clearing out forests or they're building out into the desert and they're building more homes. So there's really no set supply that it's sort of like gold. Like anytime that gold becomes scarce, they just keep mining more, and you just don't really know what the supply is. So when you think of it from that lens and think of it from a long-term investment thesis and pair that with the CAGR, something that's going to give you, as expectations are between 40 and 50% year over year over X amount of years to come. And if you even cut that in half, what does that look like? That still outpaces, relatively everything over the next decade. And with the big money showing up, it's basically, it's showing that the winner has been chosen, and they will have other ETFs, because anytime they can put a wrapper into something and there's opportunity for the big players to make money off of something or make money off of retail, if you may, basically that's it's those wrappers are going to be happening. That doesn't mean that it's going to have the same demand that Bitcoin is. And like, let's compare it to Ethereum. Like, there is a demand for Ethereum. There are some inflows that's happened on the institutional level. Will Ethereum go up over time? Most likely, potentially. Is there issues with Ethereum? Yes. And one of the biggest issues is it's not fully decentralized. Like, there's one, governing body, if you may, or company and or CEO that owns it. So when people want to argue, well, Ethereum's being burned and everything else, like, well, what happens if, somebody in this given jurisdiction, in this given government, gets mad at Vitalik, like, and then, tries to throw some lawsuits at them or ends up arresting them and throwing them in jail? What happens to the Ethereum ecosystem then? So that's sort of the counterparty risk that we talk about when it comes to looking at some of these other assets that even have an ETF, but they're still counterparty risk. Who can you arrest for Bitcoin? Like, if the U.S. government gets mad at China, China doesn't, Satoshi. I mean, there's speculation on who Satoshi is, and we can go down that rabbit hole in a different live stream. But the point is like, that is the power behind Bitcoin. Like, it can't be stopped. They've tried to kill it. They tried to stop it. It's too big to kill. It's over $2 trillion market cap, and it's slowly demonetizing real estate and demonetizing the equity market, and it's going to continue just to grow as time moves forward.
Yeah, agree. And the Ethereum Foundation, they just sold $100 million of ETH. That's the difference in Bitcoin and the rest of these other cryptos. Is these other cryptos are just pumping their token to dump it at a later price. So it's like, why is this Ethereum Foundation selling $100 million worth of Ethereum? Probably to pay for developers. It's completely different than Bitcoin, and it's sad to see people still on social media, especially like TikTok. There's a lot of XRP people over on TikTok, and they just think that TikTok's really. I mean, I'm sorry, not TikTok. They think XRP is really going to $10,000, and it's just common sense that it's not going to go there, and they're using these numbers, and it doesn't, like, the use case for XRP doesn't really make much sense, especially when companies and centralized institutions can create their own blockchain, and there's everything that's going on with the stable coins. Why would they use Ripple? Why would they use XRP? I don't know. A lot of these other coins are still based on hype, and they're still just being held up by Bitcoin, really, and people are just looking to make a quick buck. I think, I don't know when all that goes away, but I think eventually fundamentals start to play in, and you start to see some of these cryptos that aren't really producing any results, go to the price to where they deserve to be at, versus Ethereum trading at $400-500 billion right now. I don't think the use case for Ethereum or XRP is equal to what the value of the token is right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of tribalism, and I have seen those narratives out there, and I don't know. I don't agree. Shout out to the XRP army, but I don't agree just because it's you can sit and try to make up something, but you can't. It's the law of numbers, right? Like in the history of markets, like if you have a given security and you have a set supply and you have a set inflow, demand, and also a given market cap based on what's out there. Calculating the price is basic math. So just be mindful of that. If there's something that we don't foresee that occurs, and a ton of money pours into XRP, I mean, you have to do the math. Like $1,000 just isn't. I mean, $10,000 isn't realistic, and even $1,000 is outlandish as well. But that's not anything against XRP. I do believe XRP will go up, this cycle. But just having a realistic expectations, as everybody wants to be able to say, oh yeah, if I invest, I've seen a thread where somebody was saying, oh yeah, if I buy 1,000 units of XRP, which let's just look it up, and I think the price is around $3 and some change, maybe $2.99 to be exact. So if you spend $3,000 on XRP today, basically, if it goes to $10,000, I'm gonna be a millionaire. So that's sort of the ideology where the math not mathing on the back end, and so hopefully you're not getting caught up in those games, and just it goes back to the law of scarcity and what's the most non-fungible. It can't be controlled, it can't be printed, it can't be destroyed. 21 million is 21 million, and there's only one answer for that. And really, since back in, I think it was 2014, the U.S. federal government deemed Bitcoin a commodity, and it's treated as like real estate. There's no like transfer, but it's treated like real estate when it comes to taxes. So that was before Bitcoin was a multi-trillion-dollar asset. So that just goes to show you that I feel like the United States government knew Bitcoin was going to be Bitcoin before most people knew Bitcoin was going to be Bitcoin, because this is basically, this was in, like, I'm not making this up. You can Google it yourself. If I could pull it up within a quick amount of time, but it's in federal documentation and signed and sealed that Bitcoin, that's how it's taxed. It's they did that way back when Bitcoin was sub $1 trillion. So don't get caught up in all the hoopla out there. It's a lot of it. There's a lot going on in the space. The treasury companies, let's pivot back to that conversation quickly. What do you think? What do you think is going to, like, do you think that some of these treasury companies are going to go bust? Like, do you think what's the risk? Because what the thought is right now is that some of these newer companies that are spun up and they're buying Bitcoin very aggressively, that if I put X amount of money or a percentage over there, is that what's your thoughts on that? Is there any risk when it comes to the investment thesis? Because it seems like everything's potentially going to the right. As of late, over the past week and a half, there's been some pullbacks because of the MNAV compressions and such. But what's your thoughts as far as potential drawdowns or risk when it comes to looking at these treasuries outside of strategy, obviously?
Thanks for watching, Jose. Everybody that's on, like and subscribe. We have these live streams every Thursday. Talking about the treasury companies. I think the risk, I would say the risk with the other outside of strategy. So talking about all the other treasury companies that are kind of copying, the MicroStrategy playbook. I think strategy is pretty insulated and they're safe if Bitcoin goes through a 80% bear market or 80% downturn, which I don't think either one of us think that that's going to happen. But for the other companies, some of them, most of the companies I've seen have, 5-year convertible debt where, as long as their stock hits a certain price and those converts can convert. So I don't see a big risk there. The big risk I see with a lot of these treasury companies is retail investing in them, thinking that when you invest in a treasury company, as they accumulate more Bitcoin, it automatically means the stock price goes up. Just because the company goes from 100 Bitcoin to 1,000 Bitcoin, which is a 10x, that doesn't mean their stock is going to 10x. Because at 100 Bitcoin, their MNAV could be at a 10x multiple. And after they, buy their next 900 Bitcoin, their MNAV multiple could go to 1 or even lower. Right now, we're seeing a lot of these companies, not a lot of them, but some of the companies, they actually have market caps that are less than the Bitcoin value. For example, Sequans, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. They, I believe, have around 3,000 Bitcoin, which is, I think, what is that, 300 million, I think. And I don't know. I need to look that up. But there's companies that have basically the market cap is below the number or the value of the Bitcoin they hold. And that's because a lot of these companies are just diluting shares and a lot of people are just dumping the shares. So I think or retail investors just need to be careful when investing in some of these companies, expecting to just get quick gains in a short period of time, because I think the actual risk in the Bitcoin treasury companies isn't the Bitcoin or really even them having to sell Bitcoin in the short term. I think most of them actually have decent capital structures to hold the Bitcoin for a long period of time. I think it's the actual share price and retail buying in at an MNAV that may be expanded. And if that MNAV contracts, you could lose a lot of money depending on how bad that MNAV contracts. And that's something that you have to be strategic about on when to buy versus when not to buy. Like for example, with strategy, if you look at MSTR tracker, you'll be able to see where strategy has traded historically based on their MNAV. And right now at a 1.5 MNAV, they're at somewhere around there right now. That's historically cheap for strategy. So that could be a potential buying opportunity. So I think the biggest risk is just the actual share price compressing versus the companies having to sell the Bitcoin. I think. Well, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think people need to know what they're investing in and just self-education, being self-taught. So just to backtrack a little bit. So if you don't know, MNAV is a multiple of the net asset value. And NAV is a fancy way of saying net asset value, or taking the amount of Bitcoin the company has and then multiplying it by the current Bitcoin price, and then seeing what the overall Bitcoin a company valuation is. So let's, for numbers sake, and this isn't realistic because I'm gonna just make it ABC for people that are trying to figure it out. So if a company has one Bitcoin, and say Bitcoin is worth 100K. I know that's not the case, but and say their company valuation overall is at 1 million, and so they have one Bitcoin worth 100K, but their company's worth $1 million. So the MNAV for that company would be a 10x, because the multiple of the underlying net asset being Bitcoin, you have to multiply by 10 to get to the overall valuation of the company. So when you have that high multiple, it gives the company, more leeway to be able to do like ATM, which is a dilutive practice to gain more Bitcoin, so buy more Bitcoin. And when that happens, when they issue equity, that basically is like a spring, if you may, depending on how well that string is constructed. And they basically pull the MNAV back. So as it goes from 10 down to 5, and they really can't control this because there's other factors of MNAV as well when it comes to sentiment and such. But when it comes from 10 to 5, if you bought at 10, now the stock price has had a pullback on you. And if it goes down from 5 to 3, 2, and 1, you see how as there's euphoria up at 10, how it can, decimate a portfolio if you're not just practical about your overall investment thesis. Moving forward, and interesting, to your point of strategy being 1.5 MNAV and that being historically cheap, there's some companies out there that have a lot of fluff, that have like a 40 or 50 MNAV. And these are companies that have been publicly listed companies and been around for just as long as strategy, but maybe some of the bigger players in the space. I think maybe, don't quote me on this, I want to say Planeteer, maybe one.
Like a Tesla?
Potentially. And then like Eli Lilly, I think like the MNAVs for some of these companies are like over 50. So if, let's put this in perspective. If these companies that are backed by dollars and stocks that have equity that are in dollar value that just gets printed have this much fluff to like pump them up, but now you have these companies coming along like the Strategies and Metaplanets, H100s, and these companies that are aggressively buying Bitcoin, and they don't have just fluff pumping them up. What exactly do you think the MNAV could go to? Like, could it go to that fluffed up price of a 40 or 50 MNAV? Now, that might not be realistic, but it's something to note and really pay attention to as this space continues to develop, because it's definitely, a lot of finance and people in general are just sleeping on this. Like, we don't know what these MNAVs can go to. Like, this is the first time in history where we've seen once again, companies across the world and countries as well, going after, one scarce asset that has one set supply that isn't controlled by anybody. So as far as the overall valuations of some of these companies, even Strategy included, we believe Strategy is going to be the most, the most valuable company in the world when it's all said and done. As the M2 money supply continues to increase, the 630,000 Bitcoin, which we believe Saylor's going to probably get to a Nakamoto, that 1 million mark, and further, he's going to keep buying forever. That's his underlying business as a treasury, so to buy as much Bitcoin as he possibly can. When Bitcoin's $1 million and they hold 1 million Bitcoin, and they have an MNAV, it can get a little crazy as far as company valuation goes. So how much pent up buy pressure and what narrative behind that can push it to a 5, 10, 15, 20 MNAV? Is that realistic? Like, everybody can have their opinion on that, but the reality is nobody knows. That's the beauty of it. But just looking at the math, the underlying numbers, number go up.
For sure. Yeah, definitely agree. It's game, set, match. Once Bitcoin goes to 1 million, nobody's catching Saylor at that point. And even now, nobody's catching him. But yeah, it's like a game, set, match on that. Yeah, Tesla. What do you think about Tesla? Do you think Tesla could? I think Tesla's interesting, right? Because I think they have like $40 billion of cash. They're technically a Bitcoin treasury company. They hold some Bitcoin. They have 11,000 Bitcoin, $1 billion. And Elon Musk came out a couple of weeks ago, and he was disappointed with what Trump did with that bill. They passed it. He's like, I'm going to start my own government party. I don't remember what he called it. But then he came out and said, hey, our new party in the government, we're not Republican, we're not Democrat, but we're gonna accept Bitcoin because Bitcoin is, it's the best form of money. You think Tesla would ever buy any more BTC or use some of that cash that they have to buy Bitcoin at all?
Tesla is an interesting case, and the reason being is because, at one point, I think it was last bull cycle in 20. Yes. Shout out to Jose. Tesla, I think it was last bull cycle where Elon actually was accepting Bitcoin for payment for cars at one point. And I believe during that same cycle was when he came out and announced, this was after Saylor had started purchasing Bitcoin. He had announced a Bitcoin acquisition and has been sort of, pretty silent about it, since then, I guess as of late with what you were talking about, Aaron. So it's definitely interesting, and it just sort of begs the point of, if you're not in the game, you're basically betting that Tesla with their $40 billion in cash and these other companies like Apple, Amazon, it might not get in this year, but as Bitcoin adds another zero, I think the companies that have an extra zero, will start paying attention because it's big enough for them it's on their radar now. A couple $1 trillion asset to them, isn't, there's companies that are, when I talk about adding a zero to their overall company valuation, it's just not on their radar right now. So as Bitcoin adds a zero to them companies that have an extra zero, that the $1 trillion companies, then that'll be, when the next lever is turned, I believe, for the next wave of Bitcoin adoption when it comes to the major players in the current market space. So it's interesting. I mean, Elon could surprise a lot of people, and that could cause Bitcoin to go up to 200K if he came out and did something with Tesla. So it's Elon's interesting. So we'll see what comes of it with him. He knows about the space. He knows about Bitcoin. I mean, he is well versed in the digital cash economy. So at one point, he was a huge spokesperson for Bitcoin back in 2020, 2021, until he just sort of stopped accepting Bitcoin for payment, and he just got into politics and making autonomous vehicles, and really haven't heard too much else on the Bitcoin land. So doesn't mean something can pop up out of left field, some stuff that some people maybe aren't anticipating. Just for numbers' sake, if he just, I mean, there's more strategy, when it comes to how these companies have to port their capital into Bitcoin. But if he's sitting on, what do you say, 40 billion?
I think Tesla is for 40 billion.
Yeah. So if they spent half of that around the current price, that would put them up at 150 to 200,000 Bitcoin, and that's give or take the price of Bitcoin. So I mean, it's interesting. Once again, I mean, that just shows you how much of a lead Saylor has. That's if he spent half of his $40 billion. That would give them, at the current prices, around 150,000 Bitcoin. Saylor has over 4 times that amount. So will it be able to be caught? It's looking like, potentially that's a negative. But never say never. Stranger things have happened in markets. Elon will do it after the pay package is agreed on later this year. Like I said, he's been pretty quiet, but I wouldn't discount it. It wouldn't surprise me if he gets into the game and causes some type of euphoria, especially what happened with him in the presidential cabinet. How he was in the White House and out the White House, so a lot of speculation there, but we'll see.
Yep. That could be a big catalyst. We got the S&P. That's going to be a big catalyst for strategy going in the S&P. What else? What else is big?
Big companies buying. I think then Coinbase do something.
Yeah. Coinbase. Coinbase bought, how much did they just buy? They bought, in quarter 2, I think they bought 4,000 Bitcoin. So, and they said they're going to buy more Bitcoin going forward. So Coinbase is a big company. crypto staying around is now helping Bitcoin. That's how I view it. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, Coinbase buying BTC.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the slide really quickly. We had it pulled up.
It's actually good to see them finally do that because what's his name? Brian Armstrong, is that the CEO? CEO. He's been such a ETH maxi. His for a long time. It seemed like he never really went full all in with Bitcoin at Coinbase, and they were probably one of the biggest companies to kind of form the crypto wave, especially back in like 2016.
100%. They were the only exchange in the U.S. market. So here's the slide here.
2,500. Okay.
Yep. So Coinbase is long Bitcoin. They've increased by 2,500 in Q2. So they are starting their own treasury strategy as well. So there's treasury strategies popping up left and right. You're going to see miners. Miners are starting to not sell Bitcoin to OTC. And Max Kaiser, shout out to Max. He called this years ago, like back in like 2016. I remember Max was saying that eventually these miners will have to get contracts with some of these big institutions that want Bitcoin, and they'll have some type of contractual agreement of, okay, when we mine and we create X amount of Bitcoin, this will go to you guys. And so that's definitely coming to light, and it can show you like, miners aren't selling Bitcoin no more; they're just holding it. And I believe isn't one of the top 5 treasury companies? Isn't that a miner? If I'm not mistaken. Mara?
Yeah, Marathon. Marathon's a miner. Yeah,
So
they're not selling all their Bitcoin. So you have the miners who aren't selling all their Bitcoin. You have Strategy's making a new financial system with like STRC and all their products. You have Coinbase, which is like the face of crypto. They have a Bitcoin treasury strategy. Then you have Tether, which is kind of like an arbitrage on stablecoins and the U.S. Treasury bonds, and they're buying Bitcoin. So it's like you got all these financial crypto companies and Bitcoin mining companies. They're not selling. It's all going into Bitcoin. I mean, you see where it's all headed. And then eventually you're going to have the Fortune 500 companies. I think they're going to start. We haven't really seen that yet, I don't think. Like GameStop, they've been doing that, but we really haven't seen, outside of Tesla and GameStop, haven't really seen like any. Well, the banks are getting into Bitcoin and crypto now too, so it'll be interesting to see if they can hold it. So yeah. So.
I think Saylor mentioned that's going to happen when Bitcoin's $1 million. And just, I think today we seen Jamie Dimon come out and he changed his tune on cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. Years ago, he was threatening to fire anybody that buy Bitcoin that's working at his bank, especially on the trade floor. And I believe Chase has over 300,000 employees. So he said that there was a newsletter of the actual email that was sent out back then when he did it. So his tune's changing, and now banks tunes are changing. Banks were closing accounts and kicking people out of their accounts. That happened. Won't throw any banks under the bus, but let's just say at least 4 of the 5 big institutions in the U.S. markets weren't so friendly towards the Bitcoin bro. So that's all we'll say. You can pick and speculate which 4 out of 5 it is, but but now they're changing their tune. So if you're buying Bitcoin back then, they were literally closing your account out, closing your credit cards, canceling lines of credit, everything. And now they want to hold it. So the 4th turning.
You're buying Bitcoin? Why'd you close my account? Oh, they were trying to protect me from buying Bitcoin when it was $1,000. Oh, okay. You were protecting me from the 100x gains, huh? Anyways,
that's the way it goes. Cool. Well, guys, as always, we do this every Thursday. We appreciate your support. We'll be back next Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern. If you haven't done this already, make sure you retweet, like, share, with family and friends. And we'll see you next time.